Hey guys, it's Jessica with Southern Sparrow, and today is Lunar New Year, so I thought what better time than today as we welcome in the year of the fire horse to talk about the history of Mahjong and its origins in China and how American Mahjong came to be from that Chinese game and how the two variations of the game differ, because they're really quite different aside from the fact that they both use tiles. So, if we look at the history of Mahjong, and the book that I love the most is by Annalise Hines, and she really delves deep into the history of Mahjong and into the history of American Mahjong and its cultural significance. And if you're at all interested in history, I highly recommend her book. It's fabulous. So the game Mahjong was actually originated in China in the middle to late 1800s. Round about 1850 it was introduced and then became very, very popular towards the second half of that century. And it started to migrate west in the 1920s. So in the 1920s, more and more Americans were traveling to China and then coming home, and they were bringing home beautiful Mahjong sets, having learned the game on vacation, and then bringing the game home to teach their friends at home. And it had this enormous boom as a game in the 1920s in the United States. Even President Harding was playing it at the White House. And it was almost similar to the boom in Mahjong that we're seeing today, where it was a very popular way to kind of have an excuse to get together with your friends and play a great game. And it continued to be very popular. And then kind of towards the end of the 1920s, there was something that we were seeing where, like any game that you learn on vacation and then bring home and try to teach your friends, different people were teaching it different ways. And all of a sudden there were all these different variations of the game being taught and being played. And so it was difficult for groups to come together and play with new people because they may have learned a different way. And so in the 1930s, a group of Jewish women got together in New York and they created the National Mahjong League. And the National Mahjong League's goal was to kind of standardize the game, to make it easy for people to come together and be playing all the same game. So if you were an American Mahjong player, you were all going to be playing from the same rules on the same standardized card with the same hands, and it just made it easier for people to get together and know that they were able to sit down at a table with people they had never played before and all still be playing the same game. And it was at that time when the National Mahjong League was formed that Chinese Mahjong and American Mahjong really came to this fork in the road, and they became very distinct versions and variations of the game. So Chinese Mahjong and American Mahjong are really quite different. The number one way that they differ is with this card. So in American Mahjong, we all know we play with the National Mahjong League card, and that is the card that, yes, it has the rules, but it also is mainly the card that prescribes the hands that we play. And so in American Mahjong, we're matching our tiles to these hands. In Chinese Mahjong, you are not given prescribed hands. You are building your hand yourself via different melds as the hand goes along. You're playing maybe a pung and then a kong and then a pung and then a pair. And so you're building a hand that maybe those groupings don't all go together in the way that we're used to in American Mahjong. And so it makes it a little bit more creative and a little bit more fun as you're building those different melds to make your hand in Chinese Mahjong. So that's one way that it differs. Another way that it differs is just in the number of tiles. So our suits and tile symbols are very similar. We have the same suits, we have the bams, the dots, and the cracks. But in Chinese Mahjong, they do not have jokers. So in Chinese Mahjong, you play with 144 tiles. And in American Mahjong, we play with 152 tiles. And the difference is the 8 jokers. So jokers don't exist in Chinese Mahjong. They do in American Mahjong. And they were introduced in American Mahjong, I believe in the 50s or 60s, just as an additional fun thing as part of the game. And so we have jokers, whereas Chinese Mahjong does not. Additionally, the way that flowers and seasons are treated is totally different in American Mahjong versus Chinese Mahjong. So in Chinese Mahjong, and if you have an older set, you'll see that you have 4 flowers and 4 seasons, and they're numbered. And those tiles are kind of bonus tiles. So the way that they're treated in Chinese Mahjong is as you come across them, you lay them down in front, and those are bonus points added to your hand as you're scoring the game. In American Mahjong, our flowers are part of the game and they're part of our hands prescribed as F on your card. And so that's the difference in the way that we treat those tiles. And then similarly, the game is scored and betted on differently in the two variations. So American Mahjong uses the card as our, source of truth for the hands that are prescribed, the way that we handle every tile, the way that we build our hands as we gather our tiles, and also the way that we score our hands. In Chinese Mahjong, you get your score based on the patterns that you've put together in your melds that you have made along the way. And so those are scored differently based on what you end up building in your hand. So it's not a prescribed card. You're building your score based on the melds that you're adding to your hand. Additionally, in Chinese Mahjong, we do not use racks. In American Mahjong, they are an essential part of the game. So Chinese Mahjong tiles tend to be the thicker style tiles. Now, our thinner modern tiles can stand up, and you can certainly play Chinese Mahjong with our tile sets if you pull out the jokers, but they have fatter tiles which tend to stand up a little bit better because they don't use those racks. So those are kind of the key differences that make these two games, even though they're played on very similar tiles and played in similar styles, and they're both called Mahjong, those are the key differences between the two variations, and that is what makes them two very distinct games. Now, a little bit more on the history of Mahjong. Yes, it came to be in the middle to late 1800s, but I'm sure that you have heard many times it being called an ancient game. And that whole story around it being an ancient game was really more of a marketing technique in the 1920s and 30s when the game was being popularized here in the United States, of calling it an ancient Chinese game, even though it was only, 120, 130 years old at that time. And so I just think that it's really interesting that we still have confusion about when it came about. Is it a 3,000-year-old game? The likelihood is that it really is probably about a 200-year-old game. One last thing that I want to share with you guys is where the game gets its name. So the name Mahjong comes from the sound that the tiles make as they are mixed together, as we wash the tiles when we are shuffling. That sound sounds similar to the chattering of sparrows. And so the word Mahjong means sparrow. That's where the game gets its name, from its distinctive tile clack. Incidentally, it's also where we get our name, Southern Sparrow, because we love that the word Mahjong means sparrow, and we wanted to give a nod to the original game. I hope this was interesting. If y'all have more questions, I encourage you to read Annalise Hines' book on the history of Mahjong. And if you have other questions that I can help answer, drop them down below. Happy Mahjong, y'all!